All right. Well, welcome everyone to the March 23rd SIG Node meeting. We have a number of items on today's agenda, both past, present, and future that we can talk through. So with that in mind, maybe Sergey or Lana, do you guys want to give an update on just where we are with our overall PR health?
I think Sergey is not on the call, so I'm not sure that we've gotten a chance to run the numbers today. But if you give me co-host, I can share my screen and talk a little bit about the burn down to the test freeze tomorrow.
Sure. I know I was just looking in the tracking board while I get that set up before here, and it looked like we had about 20 odd PRs that could be approved in various states, but not clearly all should go in 121. So I was trying to make
I'm looking directly at the milestone. I put the link in the notes. I just can't share my screen. Here we go. So we currently have 8 items that are still open. So there's 3 PRs and I guess 5 issues that are currently in the 121 milestone. And I'm not sure necessarily how many of these we are going to be keeping, but this is what we've got on the list. So in theory, I think all of this should be merged by the end of business day tomorrow. But this is kind of what's on our list. So I'll make sure to put the link in the Slack channel so people can take a look at all of these various things. But in theory, these are all the things that we have committed to for this release, other than, last minute critical bugs. So I haven't actually taken a look at the board in a while because the only things that will be merging right now must have the milestone on them. Is there anything that I haven't looked at if there's anything critical urgent that's missing the milestone? Anything that doesn't have the milestone on it won't merge until after we reopen development. So we're frozen.
Yeah, I was looking this morning to try to see if there was things that we missed that should have had the milestone just as odd outliers. And one of the ones I was actually looking at right before coming here was causing me to refresh my memory on how we do flag versus config file parsing and precedent of things related to the read-only port. So that was one that I thought maybe go back in. But thanks for the update here, Alana.
No problem.
Move on to the next.
So Sergey is here.
Okay. So Sergey, if you wanted to, I think this week's a special week as we close, so maybe we can just move on to the next topic. Ben, do you want to bring up your topic?
Oh, Ben might not be here. I pinged him earlier. I threw this on the agenda after chatting. Ben would like to move the pause issue, I think, image stuff out of the core KK repo, possibly into a Kubernetes SIG thing. But we would need to discuss at SIG Node first. So I don't know if I'm doing a good job at representing.
Yeah. But I think I saw that thread and I think it kind of makes sense, like only cryo and containerd consume it. And Urvashi was looking into maintaining some things related to the pause issue for OpenShift. So she might be interested to help out there. Urvashi, let me know if you don't want to do that.
No, yeah, sure. I'm interested in that. So I'd like to help out.
Yeah.
So I think if we choose to do that, I think chairs have to file an issue in Kubernetes org asking for the repo creation or something like that.
Yeah, I think anyone can ask for the repo. We just have to approve it. So
okay.
I guess I apologize. Is this moving the pause container? Or is there a little more?
Yeah, the pause container image.
Yeah, the maintenance of that whole image out of.
Okay. And
right, not the location where it's stored.
What's the benefit to move out? I saw the pause image is already in a special directory, and which is basically Kubernetes open source community try to maintain, but I know a lot of it's move out, but I just want to understand what's the benefit, like the more patch, if there's the security issue, so they are going to auto patch those things, or I just wondering what's the benefit?
According to Ben's thread, he said that the benefit would be that it decouples from the Kubernetes release cycle. So we wouldn't have to worry about like getting, milestones added to things when we need to push in like critical updates or that kind of thing.
Got. Do make sense for POS because we haven't updated for years. I just, the reason I ask is just like sounds like they all they will have collect all those related image to the single place. Then someone have to responsible for and the patch and the maintenance, all those kind of things. It's not a POS image. POS image actually pretty straightforward. Yeah, for now.
Hi. So the most recent change was to make it rootless, I guess. And the main question that we had around was, what is the sequence in which we would update different projects to use the new POS image, right? So do we want Kubernetes to go first and then Containerd and Cryo, or what's the order? That's the basic confusion. So for example, right now, I think Containerd moved to 3.5 and Kubernetes hasn't. We are still in the 3.4x. Mike, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the original thing was like it should soak in Kubernetes first, and then
Yeah, I think we were hoping. I'm sorry, we were waiting for it to merge first in Kubernetes before we merged ours. I think we did, but yeah, you're right. It might have got. We might have gotten out of sync on accident, or it got reverted. Maybe I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll have to go back and check. But Don, that's the basic problem. Like anybody can like cut a image, right? Like version of the image, but then how do we make sure that it gets soaked and then apply to the rest? That's the bigger problem than actually pulling it out into a separate org, separate repo.
And then to pull out the separate repo, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't the POS container still having, it's like a common image for both Linux and Windows?
Yeah,
it's multi.
Yeah. Okay, and then the main thing that we have as a behavior in POS was around PID reaping.
Yes.
So I guess the issue by separating it out is if there's any desire to like increase the scope of behavior beyond PID reaping.
So did we have some kind of a race thing where like if we have it in a different repo, then like Cryo or Containerd could test out like a master and a PR, and then we know it's safe to release with a particular version of Kubernetes? I thought that was an issue. Or like, is it if we make a change today to the POS image, does it get immediately tested in the PR with the runtimes? That could be another.
At any point in time, we can bump POS image in KK repository and cut a new version. It's just not going to be used.
Right.
And if so to be able to use it, we'll file another PR. And it will get used only in in Docker-based jobs, not the Containerd-based jobs. That is the problem right now. So what we would then have to do is switch Containerd over, or at least put a PR in Containerd to switch to the new image and do a soak there. Anyway, so that's the basic problem. We need to write up what how we need to test it, and then that'll be, once that's done, then we can go over and move the code into a separate thing.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think through like the burden of a separate repo comes with other things potentially, like typically it's tracked as a separate sub-project. Like I'm thinking about like CRI API, like we have just thinking through like the governance checkboxes we cross off when we add these repos. Often they are a separate sub-project, and
It's not that bad. They don't need to be tracked as separate subprojects. We can just add the owner's file there into one of the existing subprojects. So that should not be a problem. Yeah, the hardest part is, somebody willing to go there and do the things that are needed to do. So not just the Docker file, right? We need to add a cloud build.yaml, those kinds of things, and add some minimal testing as well.
But this is obviously for me is the actual process, and right. So then who is on that actual process? It's kind of like the either a little bit. Again, pause is one small example. Pause haven't changed for last couple of years. Even in the past, we did talk about the increase of the scope, but we never get around to do that. And also looks like that appealing region and almost gone right now. But this is kind of this trend will not affect only pause. So basically one simple example, even we fix the problem you just raised, the container did not soaking with this one. And someone somewhere have to say, here it is the developed version of those image in another repo. And here it is the production image, what we plan to release. And then there's the two soaking. You have to, one is against the development branch and of that separate repo. And then you have like the for release, you have to map to the production version. That's just actual process. Who is going to pick up that actual process here? And so people will then in the future will end up another say, oh, SIG Node, here it is a list of the image you are going to responsible and you are going to have the ownership, but the create of the actual process for us. You know, today we basically naturally say, okay, we own pause image. That's our functionality. And every change, later our test goes through against this kind of things and the release all go together. For me, that's more.
Yeah, exactly, Don. And in the container runtimes, we don't want to use :latest. We want to use the one that's proper and appropriate, right?
Right.
But if that doesn't exist in GCR, we can't test against it. You have the dependency now on containerd and cryo to move up when you want to move up. But you could do that with Docker shim. You can't do that with containerd and cryo. So we have what comes first, the egg or the chicken problem, right?
Yeah.
I think it's appropriate in this case to have the image builder be outside in another repo.
So what I would suggest, Mike, is somebody should write this up, what it should look like, and then we pull the plug on it, and not the other way around.
Yeah.
I just like to add from the Windows side that pretty much any image that has to do with Windows has to be updated every 6 months because of Windows requiring the host compatibility constraints. So Microsoft released, I think 6 months ago now, 20H2, and so 21H1 is coming at some point, and then so on and so forth. So for every 6 months, pretty much every image that runs on Windows would need to be updated, and pause is definitely one of those images.
Jeremy, I hear you volunteering.
Hey, DEM's just another potential. CryTools also pushes images for testing, and CryTools might be the right place for this pause image. Just a thought.
Yeah, let's see if somebody steps up to write this down before not me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. We're so busy. Thanks, Tim.
So at least at this moment, I believe we are not approved this way. And I think a SIG test, a SIG release have to give some proposal from high level. Then we fill in about what a SIG node. Like we have a list of the image in the past we own. So we're going to fill that gap and make sure all those kind of the process, it is settled and won't interfere our release process. Make sure all those kind of process there.
I guess just because we haven't done something in 2 years, I guess it is a good opportunity to ask, is there something we should have been doing in the pause container that we haven't been? So if folks have particular things in mind, maybe it's a good time to bring it up. But we still don't have, I'm trying to think if we have the PID sharing feature even on by default everywhere or not right now to think through the behaviors on reaping. But yeah, I can follow up on that afterwards, I guess. Anything else we want to discuss on this topic, or are we ready to move on?
One short question. I'm listening to all this discussion and get my idea. Should we have in CRI some level of agreement between the kubelet and runtime about like which version of pause containers is configured or expected, like to prevent the wrong skews?
So right now, like the sandbox implementation is up to the runtime, right? It could be a VM or something. So it's all being left to the runtime side today. So you're thinking like a configuration just for a native container?
My thinking was what, for example, like if in Kubernetes we decide what we need to have a pause container not less than specific version, we need to communicate with to the runtime, or vice versa. Like if runtime says I am configured with pause container version, let's say 4.0, and kubelet is expected like 4.1, then we should say like, sorry.
I think it's, Alex, I think it's more of a, what is the expected behavior? We can certainly have some versioning information passed down to the CRI, but I know, for example, Cryo has gone without pause container in some demos, right? So we may not want these pause containers around for the implementation of the sandbox.
There is one. Yeah, there is one dependency right now which already exists, which is the kubelet needs to know what pause image is being used on the containerd side, so it doesn't prune it. And we have a parameter that we use currently in the kubelet config or command line to specify this is the pause image, don't kick it out.
Yeah, that's the only use case. And honestly, if we expanded that use case, I think it's reasonable that I might want to have the kubelet introspect the set of containers to ignore for GC, or I'm sorry, the images to ignore for GC beyond just pause. I know I would have benefited from that in other scenarios. So
yeah,
maybe we should just let the CRI report back system containers, system images not meant for GC, and then we just say kubelet doesn't even care about pause images anymore, and then runtimes can optimize the presence of a pod sandbox based on PID sharing being on or off generally, which is what the cryo demo demonstrates, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think, yeah, Derek, that's a good idea. Like we have other use cases for don't GC this image.
So could we just like maybe set that as a plan of record then for 122 to just be like, as a part of CRI graduation, we want to track.
Yeah, I can capture that. Yeah, I can capture that. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Alex, for prompting more conversation. Maybe get to better solutions. Okay, next up, CRI stats cap. I think there was one update that I wanted to share.
Hey, yeah, that's me. So I'm bringing this up just to kind of refresh everyone about this. And specifically, I have a question for some containerd folks and just people in general. So the stats cap, I'm still pushing for it to try to get it in 122. I feel like we're like approaching a correct set of features that we're going to support in the kubelet. Right now, we're mostly talking about covering the stats summary API with the CRI. And my specific question is, it came up internally when talking about this that it may behoove us to have, and so because right now the kubelet cAdvisor supports the kubelet sending stats summary API, and then cAdvisor itself also supports a cAdvisor metrics endpoint. and we've kind of been talking about how to handle the C-advisor metrics endpoint because it's used in a lot of Prometheus instrumentation built on top of Kube. Internally, it came up that it would totally be possible for the CRI implementation to give off those metrics. So instead of having the CRI implementation pass it to the kubelet through the CRI, and then the kubelet say, here's the advisor metrics endpoint. It's currently being discussed doing that directly from the CRI. I know both Containerd and Cryo already emit some Prometheus metrics, so it'd just be a matter of wiring up most of the C groups information for each of the containers, as well as the disk stats and the network stats. So I just wanted to check in and see what people thought about that, and see if there's any initial reaction against doing something like that.
I don't think I don't have any disagreement with it. It would be interesting to get Lantau in on the conversation and maybe Dawn and have a smaller group, little work group put together. The reason it was done this way was because that was the design plan, right? I'm sure you saw that, right? It was the plan. That's why we did it that way. And I think change the plan. That's probably fine. We just have to, dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure that when we change the plan, everybody's in agreement with it. I don't think that's a runtime issue, but
yeah, and I'm not so sure that this deviates. It kind of does shift the plan, but it doesn't deviate too far from the intention, where the stats summary API is to fulfill the functional aspects of Kubernetes, so to handle eviction and scheduling, and then have the metric C advisor stuff just to be built on top of that. It's just kind of shifting the responsibility of who is actually reporting those metrics from C advisor to the CRI. So I think it's
I agree.
Within the bounds of that plan. Yeah,
I agree completely. I'm not aware of the reasoning behind the original plan decision. Let's put it that way. So we'd have to.
And in talking to David Ashpole, it seemed, and I may be wrong on this, but it seemed as though the reason for that was to scope the changes because they were already getting pretty invasive. So, and obviously this is introducing more invasive changes. But I think, because it seems like C advisor's integration into Kube was kind of just the way that it was. And so the introduction of the CRI stats was a way to kind of patch on top of that. So now this would be then the second iteration of working around that. But someone should correct me if I'm wrong on that. That's just my impression.
So Peter, and sorry, I didn't follow up all you described here, but from high level, I'm not disagree with you. I want to I need to look at your PEP and follow up with you and David here, more detail. So we are open to all the discussing. But one thing I just want to let you know, you are right. Well, in the past, we have actually several paths to how to get the fellow stage. So right now, just like what you see, this is kind of the third. We try to evolve, and so it's not like everything's set to stone, and we cannot change it. So CRI, it is back then. I think Michael. I also say Michael Cosby is here, and he may remember that time we did actually have some middle ground. We meet as a middle ground, and this is what we try to help on the Kubernetes community. So, but we do have some destination. But unfortunately, I didn't really understand exactly what you say for the completely. So that's why we can follow up with this. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm happy to answer any questions offline or on. I mean, generally what I was proposing was just moving the source of the metric C advisor to the CRI instead of passing it through the kubelet to have it send it out that way.
Peter, just for those who may not keep this all to memory, I think just remembering the theme that we're trying to solve here, right? Which was, we want to get the CRI out of its present state. That lets us then figure out how to move any special privileges that are given to any runtime, whether that's Docker shim or CRI or containerd around stuff eliminated. And then like the major issue here was just the cost of dual scraping, which I think is significant, particularly in more intensive usage environments. So just trying to think through here where it was like, for this particular KEP, are we saying keep the status quo with Docker shim until Docker shim was moved out of tree? Or are we saying Docker shim itself would have to report these stats and proxy them to CAdvisor?
So my kind of, I mean, because all of these changes, I'm expecting them to be invasive enough to have to feature gate it. So my kind of the way that I had imagined it working was, by the time that we actually got around to GAing this feature, Docker shim would already have kind of been deprecated far enough so that we don't have to support it. I have not at all thought about supporting this in Docker shim. So I have a feeling that this will be something that'll be gated. And for people who are still on Docker shim, they'll still have to go through CAdvisor. And then eventually, once Docker shim is gone, we won't have to worry about that interaction and then strictly be going through CRI.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Let's not worry about Docker shim at all here. So just a general news update to everybody here is the Mirantis repository has a copy of the Docker shim code now. So it's gone. So we don't have to worry about it anymore. Let's not touch the code at all if we can avoid it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be sensitive to do the right thing for everybody here, Dims, and code's still there. So just trying to make sure we don't lose
I
it.
heard you, Derek. I think that Docker shim is just one topic here. And also basically, Derek, if I understand you correctly, you worry about the we make this CRI related work like more complicated, add more complexity to this one because CRI stats change scope. So include of not just like Docker shim and also like the other CRI related work we talk about, like the API promote to beta, all those other things around this. So I think this is we need to consider. Right, so I think the Peter, David, when they're driving through about those stats and the CI stats will be considered. So try to not make the existing plan we make and to more complicated here. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Go ahead.
All right. So in the spirit of being more efficient with our resources, I guess Ike or I think Alana, do you want to talk through what the latest thoughts around swap were? I know there's been a number of discussions on it.
Yeah, I think I put this on the agenda. I don't know that there's much to discuss other than I've started working on drafting a CAP, and so hopefully I'll have something up for like a PR for discussion soon. There's not been
I think
on the community doc in terms of like changes in a few weeks now, so like I think it's stable.
Yep, pretty much it's like a summarize like the current status quo and update the community on the current snapshot for like the alpha scoping. Basically, the TLDR is that from the workload point of view, there won't be any like visible performance or behavior changes. This is a combination coming from both the kubelet behavior and on the side of consuming the swap. So essentially, before alpha, the kubelet wouldn't even be able to start on the nodes that have swap enabled. But after that, the goal is to have that limitation lifted. But we're gonna still disallow the workload to consume any of the swap. so that this gives the workload some predictability for at least 122. And we're also gonna expose a basically experimental knob, probably like through qconfig, so that that's essentially the master switch that controls how much swap each workload can essentially consume, and the out-of-box value gonna be 0. And yeah, so basically this is the high level for the current alpha scoping. And yeah, if there's like a no further like objection to this, the next step would just gonna be like drafting out the cap and also start diving deeper like at the code level for the implementation.
Yeah, so I had a couple questions, and I know we had some internal discussion at Red Hat about this, and I don't know how much that translated to maybe Alana and like your conversations, but are we intending to treat this as maybe 2 discrete features? So one I had in mind was like I think what you described here of a node being able to run with swap on, but the workload can't consume it. And so from that perspective, like node services are protected by swap, but workloads are
Yeah, so there's kind of like there's like a path at which point one could kind of fork for the use cases, right? So like the alpha, regardless of whether the like
I guess what I'm trying to get at is like independent of alpha or not, like should we discuss this feature as 2 features that each might have separate alpha criteria? So like one was management components of a node can fail over to swap to preserve workload. That's one feature. And like as a part of that feature, it would mean that like workload still gets reliability, but management components don't get killed prematurely type of deal. And some of the elements of that feature I would think through would be a desire to potentially reserve the amount of swap that's not available to the kubelet to then later hand out to workloads. But I guess what I'm wondering is like, is there any desire among the folks looking at this to split this into 2 discrete feature gates similar to what we did with PIDs?
At this particular moment, not yet, but we do have like some high-level thoughts on like what the swap use case gonna end up being like, and I think it will be a natural divergence, like to split between like a system point of view and the workload point of view. But the gist, I guess, for alpha is that if we want to maintain the backward compatibility and predictability, it should be like a combination of both like a system level and some coarse workload granularity control. What I meant is that, say, Eric, like if you were presenting, if you can go to the public doc for the POC, there was a table basically highlighting all the 3 main cases that we intend to support. But the last one is more of a probably for beta scope, or probably not even beta, or even like further future. But essentially, in terms of like how we're treating swap, there are 3 main essential cases. One is that complete disable swap. This is more of the cases of the status quo, but this can be implemented either by Kubernetes fail to start, or no workload can essentially like consume any of the swap. So essentially with this alpha, we're just like switching implementation for this like disable swap world. But moving forward, like there are 2 ways we can essentially consume swap. One is that we don't take any of the counting into consideration in this world. Essentially, let me see if I can present this part.
Yeah, I guess I'm following your table here. I guess all I'm trying to call out is like, can we describe swap in 2 discrete features and then give an evolution of each feature set? So we'd have support node running with swap enabled, which would basically be what we can do with swap as a node SRE, right? And supporting our management components. And then have a separate feature, which is support pod swap consumption.
I think right now it's harder to come up with a clear boundary between those 2 worlds, because essentially once we enable the swap on the world, if we don't impose any proper accounting for the workload, that's pretty much like any workload can consume as much swap as they want, then we're essentially gonna breaking all the assumption that we made for the QoS classes for all the workload. That's why I think like at alpha, this should be like at least be thought together so that we don't break anything.
That's maybe the one thing I wanted to clarify, which was Docker shim today, I viewed as like the reference implementation that I expected our CRIs to have followed, which today Docker shim prevents any end user pod from consuming swap by explicitly nulling it out in the C group. And at least I had intended that it would be a bug if particular CRI implementers were not bounding swap to 0. It's just unfortunate we didn't pass swap as a separate function in the CRI. And so I know Mernal and I discussed maybe cryo fixing that to not set it as unbounded. I'm curious if containerd, do we know what they might be setting for swap today? But my perception is even if a node was started with swap enabled, the runtime behavior I would have expected is that runtimes don't actually give swap to pods.
That would be the current deliverable for alpha. So essentially, on the consuming swap row, we're saying like no workload can consume swap by default. This limitation is essentially like imposed through CRI by setting the swap field to 0.
Yeah, I guess what I was wondering is like, it's possible we have knobs that are not deny by default and they're kind of just left unset. And this was one that maybe we should follow up on. But yeah, I guess
it's fair to say we use the initial defaults that Docker shim had as well, right? It's also fair to say it's configurable.
Yeah. So kubelet had explicitly nilled out what Docker shim was setting, so it wasn't getting picked up from the runtime. And so it was a surprise to me when we saw maybe a behavior with a different CRI. So anyway.
I want to add it here. So Docker shim did what the right thing. There's but it didn't set to 0, but it also didn't pass. That's basically because back then we clearly say we don't support the swap. And containerd actually did pass, but also is not config very well. I can quickly share the code in the containerd there, and we did pass, but also it's not right. So we need to take care. And of course, we need to take care. We don't need to worry about the Docker shim anymore. But if we decided what to do and the CRI, we should address this at the CRI level.
Yeah, we should. We need knobs in the CRI, and then the kubelet can zero it out, and then later on we can adjust it depending on how this evolves.
Question. Instead of those hidden assumptions and hidden configuration parameters, maybe it's a lot better to extend to a CRI message to actually explicitly call out like how much memory reserved, how much memory allowed to use it for the swap and so on.
Yeah.
So when it will completely eliminate all the misbehavior between different implementations.
Yep. Agree with you.
The plan is to address that. Because right now that was just, I think, an oversight. So to answer Derek's original question of like specifically, how are we splitting this in terms of like the sort of control plane or like management component use case and the workload use case, I wouldn't be opposed to having separate like feature flags, for example, for the 2 different cases in say like beta. The only thing is that for an alpha implementation, I think it makes sense to just have the one, because I can't imagine a world in which we would have, like, I think it's not feasible right now, but correct me if I'm wrong, where we would have like no swap enabled for management components, but also have it enabled for like workload components.
So I would challenge that. I guess we can get to that point when we go through KEP reviews. We did 2 knobs for PIDs from the outset, and it works fine. I think it lets us protect management components while still gathering more use cases on workload side, which I think will be more evolved. But
I'll take a look at that.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So I guess big thank you to the group of folks who've been helping collaborate on swap. I think it'll be useful to see it moving forward. So any other topics we want to raise on swap? And thanks for the summary.
Oh, this is just like pretty much a quick summary. Okay, thanks.
Cool. Renal and Adrian, I think you want to talk about checkpoint.
Yeah, so Adrian and I went over like checkpoint restore, and internally we gathered a few more use cases. So we wanted to like give an update on the use cases and how we imagine this working and gather some feedback. So I think Adrian has prepared some slides he can share if you can give him co-host.
Yeah, I have some slides, yes.
All right, Adrian, you should be able to share.
Okay. Does that work? Do you see my screen? I don't see it.
Yeah, looks great.
Okay. So so Mrunal and I have been talking about how to move the checkpoint restore cap forward. And Mrunal has been asking me a lot of questions, which I could answer, but and which I think would make sense to put into the cap to make it clearer what it's about. And before updating the cap, I just wanted to present them here so that everyone is aware of it, and maybe if I missed something, or just if there's some more input, what would be part of the cap. So first, one of the things which have often been mentioned was the pod life cycle. And the idea behind checkpointing, from my point of view, is that checkpointing is basically possible at any time of the pod life cycle after the init container has finished. So once the init container is finished, a pod can be checkpointed at any time the user wants it. And the checkpointing is, of course, triggered by the kubelet and then by the container engine. I have implemented this for CRYO. And then the container engine talks to the runtime. Run C, and C-run has support for CREU-based checkpoint restore. And then CREU then in the end writes the actual checkpoint to a given directory by the runtime engine, by the kubelet. And with the checkpoint written by CREU, then the container engine creates an archive which contains everything for the container checkpoint, and everything means this is the checkpoint of all the processes in the container and the file system differences between the OCI image which was used to start a container and the current point in time. And the reason why this is also part of the checkpoint is with this checkpoint archive, it's now possible to restore the container on any other container engine which supports this. And so the engine will pull down the OCI image, apply the diff from the checkpoint, and then restore the containers. And so this is there's a container checkpoint archive, and then the engine can create, if you want to checkpoint a pod, it can create a pod checkpoint archive, which contains all the container checkpoint archives and some additional pod metadata. A thing about a checkpointed containers, a checkpointed container can be restored in any pod you want, as many times as you want. So it's once you have the checkpoint, you can move it around and restore it. This is for the possible use cases I'm talking later. This is necessary. Currently, I'm putting the checkpoint archive, the pod checkpoint archive in valid kubelet. Checkpoints is a directory where the archive is stored. The kubelet also has some additional metadata about the checkpoints it has locally stored. And currently, we only want to allow checkpointing using kube control. So no scheduling-based checkpointing, restoring. It should be triggered by the user. And the reason for this is for the beginning, we want to have it as simple as possible. So no automation there.
Yeah. Adrian, sorry to interrupt, but I think it may be useful to, like, did you capture the use cases in the slides?
I captured the use cases. Should I start with them?
Yeah, we can start with the use cases, and then I think I view these as like details, and we can cover these maybe.
Sure, no problem. Yeah. So the use cases from a high level are described already in the cap. So there are, from my point of view, there are 3 use cases. So for maintenance, I want to install a new kernel. I installed a new kernel. I do a checkpoint of all my pods. I reboot. I restore all my pods without losing the state of the pod. So if you don't have a pod which has a state, it's not useful, the thing. But if you have pods with state, then the checkpointing restoring helps you to not lose the state. This is one of the use cases. Another one is the fast startup. So I have a complicated application which takes some time to initialize, to read data from disk. I'm showing later, I'm talking about a JVM later as one possible use case. So I wait until the application is initialized in the container, then I take a checkpoint of the container, and then I can create copies of the container from the already initialized point of time. And then it starts up really fast without needing the initialization. And the third use case is the migration. I want to move a pod from one system to another one. And Mrunal and I have been talking with a couple of people who have shown interest in checkpoint restore in Kubernetes since the pull requests in KEP are opened. And one of the main users which came up to us was fast startup of JVM. So JVM takes some time to start up, and if you can create a checkpoint after the initialization of all the libraries, after the JIT has run, and you can create a checkpoint, and then you can restore from that point in time, and you can get up your JVMs really fast from a checkpoint. The other contact I had was from MathWorks. They are using already checkpoint restore for a couple of years in production to decrease startup time of their containers by 5 minutes from starting from a checkpoint. So users have to wait 5 minutes less in the beginning until the system is ready. From what I've been told by them is they are currently using it with Docker to do checkpoint restore, but they told me they're thinking about moving to Kubernetes, and I think they already have some different implementations also trying to do this. And another use case with which we have been in contact with, there was a group which tried to migrate the storage system on a running Kubernetes system from one storage architecture to another one, and they asked us if checkpoint restore would help. So you would migrate all the data, then checkpointer containers, unmount the old storage system, mount a new storage system at the same location, restore it, and the container would not lose state and keep running from the new storage system. So those were the use cases we captured.
Adrian or Mrunal, I think the use cases leading with that first is really helpful. I think the question I had was, maybe Mrunal, you can answer this. When we were chatting about this, we had discussed maybe what a potential pod API change would look like that would say launch this pod from this checkpoint. Is that something we have in this deck that we could share?
Adrian, did you capture the one where we said two things, right? One is we start a pod from a specific checkpoint, and the second is we are able to take checkpoints at any point. So if you have a slide on that, we can jump to that, or I can just talk to it.
No, I don't think I have a slide on that.
Okay. So basically, like while chatting with Derek and also talking with Adrian, the way we thought, like it's like this feature, like there are two ways, two things here mainly. So one thing is you should be able to checkpoint at any point. So that allows you to keep checkpointing a pod, which just creates this checkpoint, which can be used at a later point, but it shouldn't change the status of the running pod. Like checkpoint is a point in time operation. It gives you a checkpoint and you're done. It doesn't change the pod status or anything. But what you can do, the way to consume it would be to have a way in the API to start a pod from a checkpoint. And that's the only way you can consume a checkpoint. Like a new pod will be started from some previous checkpoint. And that will solve like the JVM issue, MathWork issue, and so on. And it doesn't interfere too much with the existing pod lifecycle. So that's the overall idea we had. So any thoughts on that?
I had one question, like what's the format of the archives?
Adrian, you wanna take that?
Yeah. So the format is yeah. So it's basically it's a checkpoint, and it's a diff of the root file system. That's what's in the Tower archive, and then there is the config JSON, so we know how to restore the container. And so it's all the information which it's possible to get out of runc. Okay, the root file system diff is not out of runc. This is out of the engine. So this is, but it's all files and directories which are part of the Tower archive.
Yeah, when I did this in the past, like as far as migration goes, one idea that I had was these archives could just be images. You could use a manifest list and have the different things like the rootfs diff is a layer in that image. And then you could use the actual SHA of the OCI image as like the pointer to what's the actual image. So you're not using the name of the image that can change. And then you could have different kind of metadata added, like the actual OCI runtime spec that was used. And then like if you use image as the archive, then you can push and pull from registries, and you have kind of the distribution aspect already solved.
I think that's great input, Michael. That's something we were struggling with, like how we can move these checkpoints from one node to the other, because you don't want to like run this pod on the same node. You want to checkpoint it and run it anywhere. And maybe like we can take advantage of some artifact metadata to say that this is a checkpoint and have a new pod point to it and pick it up from there.
Yeah, I could show you some of the work I did in Containerd on building an image out of a checkpoint. And,
okay.
And like also you can like, because you have bind mounts or log files, and you need to have, sometimes depending on what you checkpoint, the files that are open by the process have to be the exact size, because they'll seek to where they were. So you could use all those different manifest lists to add in bind mounts or log files that gets transferred to another system.
Okay.
Yeah, another way, our internal did also checkpoint restore. That's the couple years ago, and most we just rely on the remote storage. So that's why those kind of so this is why last time when I asked her, say, okay, I want to understand the high-level API and remove the dependency on the local node, because when we first tried, there's the local node dependency, and basically it's like we need when we implementation on the local host, like the menu. I remember Andrew mentioned that it's menu tool, and we could do, but we need to carefully to remove the local host dependency. So then you could rely on the remote storage. So that's how we play with. But that's the many years ago we tried. So yeah, but back then we have failed. It is just because we didn't cautiously add some local host dependency back then. So that's why it's not that easy to migrate those. And you end up those things have to restart always on the single node. So that's the problem.
Okay.
So Don, I think when I was chatting with Adrian, we were imagining a checkpoint object which could be backed by like a persistent volume, and like based on Michael's input, it can also be like an image somewhere on the registry. Yeah.
Yes.
But Adrian and Ronald, do I understand correctly what this will work only for default like runc and crun runtimes? So any kind of like VM-based runtimes or any other runtime class will be prevented from that.
So currently yes, but I don't think there's anything preventing a VM-based runtime to provide the checkpoint interface runc does. So I did also the crun implementation, and I just replicated what runc was doing, and once you have the same interface that runc is doing in crun, it was possible to checkpoint containers with crun, and so it should be possible with any other runtime if they have the same commands as runc for checkpointing and restoring.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Then just thinking about other things that might be related to this, so we keep it in our minds. Is anything we may do in the future around user namespace remapping, both at a node or pod level? Would that impact anything that could be pursued around checkpoints? It feels like there's a relationship here that you'd have to preserve that mapping.
Yeah, I think that we'll have to store the mappings for sure. Like Adrian can talk to the details of like how much user namespace has been tested with checkpointing. I assume it should work, but Adrian can correct me.
So I haven't used user namespaces with checkpoint restore for some time now, but I know that LexC and LexD, they are also doing checkpoint restore with user namespace based containers. And there is support in Creo to work with user namespace containers. It's all there, but it hasn't been used a lot in the past.
Yeah, the challenge will be like when we are moving it from one node to the other, and like most likely we won't be able to guarantee that the same user namespaces can be given back to that pod. So if we can manipulate something in the checkpoint to like change the range or something, that may be an issue. Yeah.
Cool. I know we're running up at the end of the hour. I think, thank you, Renal and Adrian, for continuing to explore this. And it sounds like, Michael, be awesome if you could connect your experience with
sure. I think what we can do is like we can kind of share a doc, like go over the use cases, add what we talked about today, and then like Michael shared a link, but if he can chime in more as well, it will be helpful.
Yeah.
Andrew, can you link your slides to the SIG Node meeting notes?
I will do that. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all who attended today and shared with the broader community. So look forward to finishing out this release, and then I guess we should reserve some time in an upcoming SIG meeting to figure out what we're going to do in 122. So everyone have a great afternoon or evening. We'll talk on Slack.